he just looks completely buried. And then, in case you're wondering, there's also piles of paper on the floor of different issues and trade agreements, and it's just a complete brain explosion to think how one person is supposed to be across all this in detail. And they're actually a very small staff, and what they do is mind-boggling in terms of the relationships that they have to cover and all the nuances. And just to reinforce what Nina was saying too about the resources that you can access, one of the stories was that I had a friend who was wanting to study the Moravian Brethren, which is a very small offshoot of the Lutherans in Germany. And she was finding it easier to study this small kind of community in Germany from Newcastle than she was in Germany, because in a way our libraries here are more open. And I don't know if you've ever tried to borrow a book from a library in France, but it's really hard. You have to, okay. So you have to. They're not open to the public. You have to get a letter from the dean of your university to register as a reader, and then you have to sort of sign up for 7 days or a month, and then you have to prove that the book that you want is in the collection before you can actually search the collection. So in a way, I think perhaps Australia has a better system, so you can actually probably just stay in Australia and order the book from here, and you'd be better off. And you can do that through the library system. The National Library in Australia is very good. And in a way, also surprising, some of our collections are better here. Not all, of course, but the time, if you're looking towards stuff in the 1800s, for instance, Australia was really rich, and we were trying to prove to the world that we were on top of all European issues. And so some of the French collections in the State Library here in Victoria are better than they've got in France. Because we're hosting also in the 1880s, don't forget, the International Exhibition. And the legacy of that is still in our public institutions. It's just remarkable. So you've got people coming to, Europeans coming to the National Library in Canberra to study European collections sometimes. And they do have this fabulous thing that you don't have to be in Canberra. They're quite aware that they're sort of stuck there and they're meant to be a national institution serving the nation. So they have this thing, they're very good reader online services if you bring them up. And they have copies direct, where they'll, even for a small charge, copy a book if you want and post it to you, which is just, I think it's amazing. And one of the things that I found was a program of a Goethe production that was on in 1892 here at Princess Theatre, just around the corner. And it just sparked my interest because I don't know if you know that we've got a ghost. The Princess Theatre has a ghost. It's and the ghost was the Mephistopheles character who died as he descended into hell in the trapdoor. That production was 1888, and now there's still a Frederick bar because of the ghost. And so just researching this ghost story, I found this theatre program, which was actually a French opera that was sung by an Italian opera company, and the guy who was Mephistopheles was called Frederici, but he was actually English. He'd given himself an Italian name to fit in with sort of the Italian kind of feel of the rest of the opera company. And it was a French opera that was put on by and it was a German libretto by Goethe, of course. And investigating all of this just brought back to me this whole thing of how it was really interesting to understand who we were as Australians at that time, because we were very proud of the fact that as soon as an opera opened in Paris, we were able to bring it to Australia in the 1800s within about 6 months. It was here. We were so sophisticated. We were such an aspirational culture. And just to think of that in terms of the way we think of ourselves as, convicts or whatever, in many places, not just Melbourne, but also in country towns like Ballarat and Bendigo, where they had gold, we were actually wanting to see what was the best productions in the world, and the productions that we're doing here were as good as anywhere in London. And not only that, we fostered singers like Dame Nellie Melba, who went back to Europe and fed into that European tradition. And it's astonishing that there wasn't just one Nellie Melba, there was about 25 We think of Nellie Melba because she had a better PR company. But that's just, yeah, so if you want to know more about selling your soul to the devil and how to die as Mephistopheles, the resources were just kind of, like when I started researching the story, the resources were just falling out of the sky, and it's just so fascinating to think of how that particular one example of one particular Faust opera not only enriched our own understanding of what's happening up the road here, but who we were as Australians at that time, and who we are in relation to Europe, and how that relationship had always been part of then, and it's still part of now, because the Faust story is still unfolding. Even in Berlin at the moment, there's still an argument about whether Goethe really belongs to the East or the West, because and that's fascinating too, because the part 2 of Faust does not actually go to hell. He ends up in heaven. He's forgiven, and that's incredible, because that then is taken as meaning that capitalism is bad and socialism is good. So it's a criticism of the Enlightenment, and whether or not that was what Goethe really meant is up for debate. And it was headline news in Germany in 1955 when they were dividing Berlin, and it was like, who gets Goethe? So it's great.